Vanishing folklore and beliefs. The vision of MacConglinney. Public domain reading. The vision of MacConglinney. Caillte, king of Munster, was a good king and a great warrior. But there came to dwell within him a lawless evil beast, that afflicted him with hunger that ceased not, and might not be satisfied, so that he would devour a pig, a cow, and a bull calf, and 60 cakes of pure wheat, and a vat of new ale for his breakfast. Whilst as for his great feast, what he ate there passes account or reckoning. He was like this for 3.5 years, and during that time it was the ruin of Munster he was, and it is likely he would have ruined all of Ireland in another half year. Now there lived in Armagh a famous young scholar, and his name was MacConglinney. He heard of the strange disease of King Caillte, and of the abundance of food and drink, of white meats, ale and mead. There were always to be found at the king's court. Thither then was he minded to go to try his own fortune, and to see of what help he could be to the king. He arose early in the morning and tucked up his shirt, and wrapped him in the folds of his white cloak. In his right hand he grasped his even-poised knotty staff, and going right-hand-wise round his home, he bade farewell to his tutors and started off. He journeyed all across Ireland till he came to the house of Picken, and there he stayed and told tales and made all merry. But Picken said, "Though great thy mirth, son of learning, it does not make me glad." "And why not?" said MacConglinney. "Knowest thou that, scholar, that Caillte is coming here tonight with all his host, and if the great host is troublesome, the king's first meal is more troublesome still, and troublesome though the first be, most troublesome of all is the great feast. 3 things are wanted for this last: a bushel of oats, and a bushel of wild apples, and a bushel of flour cakes. What reward would you give me if I shield you from the king from this hour to the same hour tomorrow? A white sheep from every fold between Carn and Cork." "I will take that," said MacConglinney. Caillte the king came with the companies and a host of horse of the Munster men. But Caillte did not let the thong of his shoe be half loosed before he began supplying his mouth with both hands from the apples round about him. Picken and all the men of Munster looked on sadly and sorrowfully. Then rose MacConglinney, hastily and impatiently, and seized a stone against which swords were used to be sharpened. This he thrust into his mouth and began grinding his teeth against the stone. "What makes thee mad, son of learning?" asked Caillte. "I grieve to see you eating alone," said the scholar. Then the king was ashamed and flung him the apples, and it is said that for 3.5 years he had not performed such an act of humanity. "Grant me a further boon," said MacConglinney. "It is granted on my troth," said the king. "Fast with me the whole night," said the scholar. And grievous though it was to the king, he did so, for he had passed his princely troth, and no king of Munster must transgress that. In the morning, MacConglinney called for juicy old bacon and tender corned beef, honey in the comb, and English salt on a beautiful polished dish of white silver. A fire he lighted of oak wood, without smoke, without fumes, without sparks, and sticking spits into the portion of meat, he set to work to roast them. Then he shouted, "Ropes and cords, here!" Ropes and cords were given to him and the strongest of warriors. And they seized the king and bound him securely, and made him fast with knots and hooks and staples. When the king was thus fastened, MacConglinney sat himself down before him, and taking his knife out of his girdle, he carved the portion of meat that was on the spits, and every morsel he dipped in the honey, and passing it in front of the king's mouth, put it into his own mouth. When the king saw that he was getting nothing, and he had been fasting for 24 hours, he roared and bellowed and commanded the killing of the scholar. But that was not done for him. "Listen, King of Munster," said MacConglinney. "A vision appeared to me last night, and I will relate it to you." He then began his vision, and as he related it, he put morsel after morsel past Cathal's mouth and into his own mouth. And thus he began his vision. "A lake of new milk I beheld in the midst of a fair plain. Therein a well-appointed house, thatched with butter, puddings fresh boiled, such were its thatch rods, its two soft door posts of custard, its beds of glorious bacon. Cheeses were the palisades, sausages the rafters. Truly 'twas a rich-filled house, in which was great store of good feed." Such was the vision I beheld, and a voice sounded into my ears. "Go now thither, MacConglinney, for you have no power of eating in you." "What must I do?" said I, for the sight of that had made me greedy. Then the voice bade me to go to the hermitage of the wizard doctor, and there I should find the appetite for all kinds of savory, tender food, acceptable to the body. There in the harbor of the lake before me, I saw a juicy little coracle of beef. Its thwarts were of curds, its prow of lard, its stern of butter, its oars were flitches of venison. Then I rowed across the wide expanse of the new milk lake, through seas of broth, past river mouths of meat, over swelling, boisterous waves of buttermilk, by perpetual pools of savory lard, and islands of cheese by headless of old curds, until I reached the firm level land between Butter Mount and Milk Lake, and the land of early eating, in the front of the hermitage of the wizard doctor. Marvellous indeed was the hermitage. Around it were 70 smooth stakes of old bacon, and instead of thorns above the top of every stake was fixed juicy lard. There was a gate of cream, whereon was a bolt of sausage, and there I saw the doorkeeper, Bacon Lad, son of Butterkins, son of Lardipole, with his smooth sandals of old bacon, his leggings of pot meat around his shins, his tunic of corned beef, and his girdle of salmon skin around him, his hood of flummery about him, his steed of bacon under him, with its 4 legs of custard, its 4 hoofs of oaten bread, its ears of curd, its 2 eyes of honey, in its head, in its hand, a whip, the cords whereof were 24 fair white puddings, and every juicy drop that fell from each of these puddings would have made a meal for an ordinary man. On going in, I beheld the wizard doctor with his 2 gloves of rump steak on his hands, setting in order the house, which was hung all around with tripe, from floor to roof. I went into the kitchen, and there I saw the wizard doctor's son with his fishing hook of lard in his hand, and the line was made of marrow, and he was angling in a lake of whey. Now he would bring up a flitch of ham, and now a fillet of corned beef, and as he was angling, he fell in and was drowned. As I set my foot across the threshold into the house, I saw a pure white bed of butter, on which I sat down. But I sank down into it, up to the tips of my hair. Hard work had the 8 strongest men in the house to pull me up out of the top of the crown of my head. Then I was taken in to the wizard doctor. "What aileth thee?" said he. "My wish would be that all the wonderful viands of the world were brought before me, that I might eat my fill and satisfy my greed. But alas, great is the misfortune to me who cannot obtain any of these." "On my word," said the doctor, "this disease is grievous, but thou shalt take home with thee a medicine to cure thy disease, and shalt be forever healed therefrom." "What is that?" asked I. "When thou goest home tonight, warm thyself before a glowing red fire of oak, made up on a dry hearth, so that its embers may warm thee, its blaze may not burn thee, its smoke may not touch thee, and make for thyself 9 morsels, and every morsel as big as a heath fowl's egg, and each morsel 8 kinds of grain, wheat, barley, oats, rye, and therewith 8 condiments, and to every condiment 8 sauces. And when thou hast prepared thy food, take a drop of drink, a tiny drop, only as much as 20 men will drink, and let it be of thick milk, of yellow bubbling milk, of milk that will gurgle as it rushes down thy throat. And when thou hast done this, Whatever disease thou hast shall be removed. Go now, said he, in the name of cheese, and may the smooth, juicy bacon protect thee. May yellow curdy cream protect. May the cauldron full of pottage protect thee. And now as MacConglinney recited his vision, what with the pleasure of the recital, and the recountings of these many pleasant viands, and the sweet savour of the honeyed morsels roasting on the spits, the lawless beast that dwelt within the king came forth until it was licking its lips outside its head. Then MacConglinney bent his hands with 2 spits of food and put them to the lips of the king, who longed to swallow them. Wood, food, and all. So he took them an arm's length away from the king, and the lawless beast jumped from the throat of Cathal and onto the spit. MacConglinney put the spit into the embers and upset the cauldron of the royal house over the spit. The house was emptied, so that not the value of a cockfighter's leg was left in it. And 4 huge fires were kindled here and there in it. When the house was a tower of red flame and a huge blaze, the lawless beast sprang to the roof tree of the palace, and from thence he vanished and was seen no more. As for the king, a bed was prepared for him on a downy quilt, and musicians and singers entertained him, going from noon till twilight. And when he awoke, this is what he bestowed upon the scholar: a cow from every farm, a sheep from every house in Munster. Moreover, that so long as he lived, he should carve the king's food and sit at his right hand. Thus was Cathal, king of Munster, cured of his craving, and MacConglinney was honored. If you enjoyed the reading of this Irish folktale, I would love it if you could click the subscribe button right now. Thank you so much for your support. Vanishing Folklore and Beliefs.